Good afternoon, year six. I hope you've had a good lunch and are ready to carry on your history learning based on the Battle of the Somme. Last week, we began looking at the Battle of the Somme and looked at the first day of it, having already looked at aspects of the First World War generally. Today, we're going to consolidate some of that knowledge about the early part of the Battle of the Somme and then eventually understand how it was impacted on the war as a whole. Be successful, we'll do some research today about some elements of the Battle of the Somme. We'll think about, so consider the impact of those key elements of the Battle of the Somme. And finally, we'll predict how, if we've gone back 104 years to 1916, how rather than the events unfolding as they did, if we could have affected them in a different way. The reason it's our focus primarily today will be why it's considered so significant. First of all, we'll just think more generally back to our two previous history lessons on the First World War. And here you've got some statements. Now, all of these four points are related to general facts about the First World War. However, I've made some errors. I've made 8 errors. So I'd like you to really forensically, so really carefully read through these and see if you can spot where the errors are. Now, some of them are really minute, and I'll give you an example of that with the first one. So the first one that's an error is this one, where I've circled the blue. It's not King George IV. It was, in fact, King George V. And what I'd like you to do with your passage of writing like this is circle any errors and then just amend them, alter them on the sheet. You don't need to rewrite the whole statement. You just need to fix it just to see if you can really carefully, like little detectives, spot where I've made an error. I'm sure, Hanya, you will enjoy spotting Mr. String's mistakes. So if you could have a go at that. I'm pretty sure just then I said Mr. String's mistakes. So now I'm making mistakes saying my own name. There we go. Okay, so see if you can find them in there. Next job, we're going to have a look at some words. Now, 2 words that we can think about today which relate to how people conduct military work. So when the soldiers, or when, particularly when soldiers are in action, they multiple elements of their action are called a campaign. So when lots of events happen, lots of battles happen, the collective word for those battles is a campaign. A small group of battles, which are all where you're trying to attack another area, would be called an offensive. Where you go forward, you're on the attack, you're on the offensive. There's 2 words used then. If we're attacking somewhere, we're on the offensive, and the battles we have as part of that movement are called the offensive. If we're having battles where we're on the offensive but also on the defensive, it goes on for a long time, it's called a campaign. Those 2 words, okay? Campaign or offensive. I'm going to show you some words you need to see if you can identify which ones mean a campaign and which ones are relevant for offensive. So, definition: a number of battles spread over a period of time. Then we've got an image that looks like there's lots of different battles going on. We've got a synonym for the word attack, the opposite of defense, and during the incredibly violent, many thousands died as they defended and attacked. Okay, so we've got these different elements of our vocabulary work. So I'd like you to have a little think about which ones you think are which. Okay, just have to think. Pause the video. Some of you already spotted, I'm sure, that yeah. So campaign is defined as a number of battles spread over a period of time. So campaign, we might win some of the battles, we might lose some of the battles. It happens over a long period of time. You sometimes hear footballers refer to the campaign. So the number of games in a season is sometimes described as a campaign. A season is described as a campaign. In the presidential election in America recently, it was sometimes described as an election campaign. So it's not just one day where you go and to try and persuade people to vote for you. It's many days where you go and interact with them. Again, here you can see arrows going forward and back on that map. If you look, red attack arrows, the black attack arrows, they're showing that people are on the offensive, but also the defensive, and it happens over a long period of time. This is in the area now described as both Palestine and Israel, and this is showing a campaign that took place within the First World War. Synonymous with an attack is an offensive. Okay, so an offensive is just going forward, just going forward. Synonymous with, antinomous. So the opposite of offensive is defensive. So defense. Okay, and here we've got during the incredibly violent campaign, because they attacked and they defended. Okay, so slightly different, but both of them tend to be words centered around the use of military force over more than one day. Okay, so campaign, the word pattern, open country is what Champagne used to mean. So Champagne in Old French meant open country, countryside. And lots of campaigns, military campaigns, used to be in the open country because they were across fields and across parts of the world. So Champagne is where the word campaign comes from. Then offensive. If we think about offensive, we're synonymous as well. Sorry, it's sometimes used the word not about fighting, but about being rude. We describe somebody as being rude. They're offensive, and that means that they're attacking somebody, whether it's verbally or physically. Normally, verbally, if we talk about people being offensive, and it's the same with the idea of in a battle or in a war. If you're on the offensive, you are attacking. So offensive. If you are committing an offence, you are attacking. You're breaking the rules. You're attacking. Okay, so offensive and attack are synonymous. Right, guys. There's some other language here. We've got relieve, over the top, and battalion. Now we've already looked at offensive and campaign. Now, what I'd like you to do is where there's these gaps in these sentences, I'd like you to fill in one of the words campaign, relieve, over the top, offensive, or battalion. So this is the first piece of writing I'd like you to do today, where you, after you've amended that retrieval work, I'd like you to look at these sentences and see if you can identify within these sentences which word should be placed in the gaps. That's your first task today. That's on your sheet. Pause the video whilst you work through that, please. So thinking about campaign and offensive, we've already looked at. So relieve, when have you heard the word relieve? Or what do you notice about the word relieve and relief? Over the top, where might somebody be moving, going over the top of somebody in one of these sentences contexts? And battalion, if I'm not sure what it means, then maybe the context of the sentence might give me a clue where none of the others would work. So pausing that while you work through that, please. Great stuff. Now, July 1916, when the Battle of the Somme began. Okay, it was in France, as we've said before, by the River Somme, hence the name, the Battle of the Somme. Okay, lots of French soldiers had already been killed, had already been lost. When we talk in war about loss, we tend to be meaning the death of soldiers. We don't talk about them as though they've just gone to the wrong place. When we talk about soldiers being lost, we mean that they died. Okay, so they've been lost at another place called Verdun. Okay. Now, because of the allegiances between the Triple Entente, because the French had been attacked, the British needed to go and help the French defend themselves against the Germans. If you remember the Triple Alliance, the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians. So the Triple Entente, France, England, and Russia needed to defend France. Now, because of the empire, if you remember back to Queen Victoria, she was the Empress of India. And the British Empire had spread across the globe during the 19th century. Now, because of that, there were soldiers within the army, and it's still the case today. There's soldiers within the army from other countries around the world. So there were countries who were fighting alongside Britain, who were from Ireland, Newfoundland, which is in Canada, now South Africa and India. So people from around the world were supporting the British fire forces. If you remember as well, when we looked at the beginning of the war, there's trenches, there's trench warfare, so deep holes that were used to hide soldiers from the attacks of the other soldiers. But the problem was the deep holes allowed water, allowed rats to come into them, and they were therefore very unpleasant places to reside. And that's where those trenches, where those soldiers lived in. Okay, they'd lived them, and now they were told to, as I know, the horrible reality is they were there to fight. So therefore, they couldn't just stay in the trenches. Sometimes they would be told by their commanding officer, such as the colonel in times gone past, to go over the top. They had to go up there, to scale up there, to ascend the side of the trench, and they had to go over the top. Now, when they were over the top, they would be running towards enemy troops, and that would be the point where they were in no man's land. So it was called no man's land because nobody wanted to be there. Nobody was there because if you were there, the other side could put their head up, get their increasingly advanced guns out, and shoot you. Okay, because you were in the area known as no man's land. Now, the British had a plan of how to triumph in the Battle of the Somme. They decided the best thing to do was to shoot at them and then run towards them and fight them with their what's called bayonets. So on the end of their weapons, they had a knife which is called a bayonet. Some people thought it was a bad idea. However, some people thought it was a good idea. Okay, so it was a bit of a discussion. In many respects, we say unfortunately, because the result is lots of soldiers died as a result of this plan. But some soldiers, some senior soldiers, some leaders of soldiers, such as General Douglas Haig, did think it was a good idea. However, lots of soldiers died due to this plan. Now, there was a soldier called Lord Kitchener, and he was a very famous man in the country. So he's the man with the moustache. I would have tried to grow one to evidence it for you. And he became almost like the center of an advertising campaign. And the campaign was to try and get soldiers to support the or to try and get more people who weren't soldiers to sign up, to enlist, to join up to the army, so that they then had enough soldiers to support this strategy. If you think back to earlier, the plan is to go over the top and run at the Germans who've got the guns. So you obviously need a lot of soldiers. The horrible reality is lots of soldiers were going to die, and therefore you needed lots of soldiers. So Lord Kitchener, the guy with the moustache in this picture, he came at the forefront of this campaign, and the campaign was to try and get lots of people to join up. If you just have a look at this first poster, Britons, join your country's army, God save the Queen, King. Have a look what it's trying to tell you about joining up. Is it that you'll get paid lots? How else is it trying to tempt you in? How is it trying to persuade you? Is it saying you'll be unimportant? You'll be a waste of time? Or is it saying you'll be important? So Lord Kitchener's pointing at that person. The poster isn't just going anyone, it's pointing at you. It's pointing at you. It's pointing at you and saying, Lord Kitchener, because it's his face, wants you. Okay, so it makes it quite a special appeal to the individual. Lord Kitchener wants you, okay? And it says, join your country's army. So it's not just any old army, it's the army of your country. So if you're loyal to your country, you're going to join that army. And then the bottom line says, God save the king. So it's not just your country that needs you. It's not just Lord Kitchener that needs you. It's God and the king. And lots of people still now support the monarchy, the queen, and lots of people still now are members of faiths. However, back 104 years ago, more people would have been monarchists, would have really, really revered the king. More people believed in God, and therefore, when they're told that God save the king is linked to this, they would have been persuaded to do it.